Hello everyone. In this video lecture, I'm going to be discussing some of the material that we would have covered in our interactive class, turning what intended to deliver by way of some discussion questions that you would have analyzed in your small groups into a direct delivery of content. Due to my internet connectivity issues, the entire nature of this synchronous class has been transformed into an asynchronous course. Regular schedules for classes will begin again next week, and I do have extended office hours next week that are listed in the message in Omnibox that I sent out over the weekend. However, if you'd like to meet to discuss the mock exit exam that's due on Friday, or this story, or anything else pertaining to the course, at another time that's more convenient for you, please reach out to me and I'll attempt to accommodate you as best as possible. In order to understand H.P. Lovecraft's works, for those of you who did not take my Weird Tales course, wherein I discuss the author thoroughly, you have to understand something about his philosophy and his driving literary theory of cosmicism. Lovecraft believed in real life that human beings were this insignificant transient speck, utterly without value and meaning in a much larger cosmos, a vast, incomprehensible universe, an ocean of chaos that surrounds our tiny, insignificant, meaningless globe of the Earth. This philosophical position and this worldview found its way into his literature by way of his literary philosophy or his central theme of cosmicism. Most of his monsters are designed to illustrate the nature of the universe as something fundamentally incomprehensible, alien, hostile, but only hostile in terms of their appearance. In reality, the universe and these monsters barely even recognize us. We are like unto amoeba unto them. We aren't of any significance. When they interact with us, it's merely by accident. We don't notice the whole host of germs or microorganisms that we destroy every moment when we breathe in or breathe out. In much the same way, the monsters in Lovecraft's universe oftentimes have this kind of ignorance regarding our existence, but by their very nature, they're hostile to us. They destroy us without even being aware of us, like we might stepping on ants that we don't even see. So it seems to the ant that we have a desire to destroy them. But in reality, when we're stepping on their nest or when we're destroying a whole colony of bacteria that we can't even see, we don't have any feelings towards them. We're just blindly going about our existence without thought, destroying them. That position of ants or bacteria is the position of human beings in Lovecraft's universe, according to this theory of cosmicism, or this literary theme of cosmicism. That human beings are this insignificant, transient, easily destroyed speck in the universe, and indeed all of humanity and all of its history, everything that we strive towards, everything that we've believed in, hoped, and valued, are utterly meaningless in this larger cosmic sphere. Thus, there is no purpose to life. It's an incredibly nihilistic perspective on the universe, that everything that we believe in, everything that we call good, everything that we value, is without actual objective grounding and meaning in this much larger universe. Most of Lovecraft's monsters are an embodiment of, for him, that reality. In the rest of this video lecture, I'm going to delve into Dagon and its symbolism in order to unpack it and better understand it. Lovecraft was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, with its notable maritime heritage. His mature fiction, beginning with Dagon, often represents the sea as either an inherently chaotic force of destruction that's threatening to overwhelm the earth and consume it, or as a form of concealing bulwark that shields from human sight terrors that would swallow the whole of mankind into madness. Dagon, in both its theme of human vanity, the pointlessness of human existence, the meaninglessness of everything that we strive towards and believe in, and its maritime setting, is very much Lovecraftian. It contains within it seeds of what would blossom to become the central horror of Lovecraft's fiction, mankind's terrible position in the universe, wherein life and all human achievement are inconsequential, transient incidents given the infinity of time and space in this cosmic scope. Dagon is also a window into the way in which Lovecraft's works relate to biblical entities and narratives. Now, as I discussed in that original set of video lectures, Dagon was one of several rivals to the Hebrew national deity. In order to grasp the biblical influences of this tale, and thus understand the monster Dagon at its heart, beyond the obvious and general implications of selecting this Philistine deity as the subject and title, we have to understand Lovecraft's fascination with the unnameable. Lovecraft believed that the universe was fundamentally incomprehensible, that we could strive to understand certain small portions of the universe, shed light on just infinitesimally small mysteries. But our minds, our abilities to understand the world biologically, physiologically, based on our very nature, was so limited that we could only understand a small fraction, and in fact, do so imperfectly. As human beings, we don't have the aesthetic systems or the intellectual systems, the philosophical systems or the religious systems. Our beliefs about beauty, truth, goodness, spirituality, all these structures and systems that we develop, that we build in order to understand the world, to organize it, none of them are enough to represent or account for, and thus to neutralize the horrifying reality of universal chaos. Nothing that we come up with in terms of our beliefs about science, religion, or philosophy are really enough to allow us to define the universe or any part of it, or to compartmentalize it, to break it down and to understand it. Human artistic creation, scientific inquiry, and all systems of discourse, discussion, and knowledge are insufficient to the task of defending us against the unknown and the fundamentally unknowable. In turn, we can't really provide names or place names onto things. Naming something allows us to set it into a box. By labeling something as animal or man, we can separate them out and further break them down by providing labels to things. Labels give us these conceptual spheres that allow us to break the universe down into what we feel are conceptual parts. The theme of unnamability, of the inability of human beings to apply names to things, is an illustration of how our minds are really incapable of grappling with the universe. The mind, the human mind, is by its nature incapable of understanding the laws of the cosmos. In Lovecraft's works, there are things that are not meant to be known, things that if we knew them would destroy us, and things that we cannot know. Really, the former, things that are not meant to be known, are the horrors of all these monstrous creatures in his universe. But symbolically, that represents the fact that, for Lovecraft, humans are not meant to know. We're not meant to grapple with the reality that the universe doesn't care about us. There is no God, there is no purpose, there is no meaning. Everything that we believe in is purposeless. It's all a comforting lie about hope and goodness and religion. All of these things are comforting lies that we tell ourselves to get us through the long, dark, horrifying, pitiless night of our lives. Transgressions of the boundaries of knowledge cause the limited human mind to fracture under the strain of the impossible. Any attempt to know what cannot or should not be known, to strive to understand how the universe actually works, only reveals to us that dark, illimitable gulf of chaos and our own pointless, vain existence. That knowledge, or that attempt to gain knowledge and the realization we can't, is what destroys us. In Dagon, we see Lovecraft's theme of the unnameable and the unknowable in their infancy. Human efforts to grapple with the unknown, those things which are beyond mankind, are consistent. The Philistines sought to take the Dagon entity and confine him to a name, to confine him to their religious structures. In the same way that the narrator appeals to his knowledge of Greek myth and the writings of Milton and Poe and the art of Gustave Doré when confronting that second hellish expanse beyond the mound and the bas-relief. So when we see something that we don't understand, like the Philistines see this monstrous creature in the ocean and they call it their god Dagon, or when the narrator sees this hellish expanse of the mire and the monolith that's created by an alien civilization from under the ocean, we try to take these ideas and concepts, these schemes of art like Poe and Gustave Doré, and stick it onto something in order to neutralize it and understand it. However, not only does the narrator recognize the limits of a poem, he also realizes that he shares their failure when he states that we should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness of that hellish black mire. Through his appeal to various aesthetic systems as a defense, the narrator offers us a means of comparison between the bas-reliefs depicting the Dagon entities and Paradise Lost. Gustave Doré was responsible for a series of iconic illustrations that would appear in copies of Paradise Lost, including the deluxe edition that Lovecraft owned as a child. Simultaneously delighted and repulsed, Lovecraft would discover copies of Dante's Inferno and Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and become enchanted by the supernatural magic of the Doré pictures, as he put it. These images would weigh on his mind as a child. And even as an adult, he admitted that in the space between waking and sleeping, he would still conjure up images of night gaunts who haunted his childhood dreams, inspired, he believed, by the illustrations in Paradise Lost. In Lovecraft's mind, then, Doré, with his psychologically scarring and inescapably seductive images, would forever be associated with Milton. Given the connection between Paradise Lost and Dagon through Doré, and through the narrator's direct reference to Paradise Lost, we can surmise that Lovecraft had a particular biblical tale in mind when he selected the Philistine god as the source for his subject in this story. The short story's climactic encounter with Dagon points us towards that contest narrative between Yahweh and the Philistine god that takes place in 1 Samuel 5, the one that I described in a previous video lecture. In that story, Yahweh crushes his rival's idol. The fragile artistic representation of, the Israelites assert, an equally insubstantial God in a conflict between the Ark, which is a corporeal representation of the divine covenant between God and his people, and the physical depiction of Dagon. In the narrative the Bible's authors construct, this conflict of artistic manifestations, the Ark versus the statue of Dagon, demonstrates the power that lies behind the objects, the power that lies within that which they represent. That is, the ultimate unlimited power of the God behind the Ark, and the powerlessness of the unreal false god of Dagon. Lovecraft revisits this battle, this conflict between aesthetic or artistic representations and the two gods. He stages a conflict between the deity of Hebraic myth and, in this story, the reality of the physical creature Dagon. Doré's work and the aesthetic systems are sufficient in the narrator's mind to define and confine the devil in Paradise Lost through Milton and in Doré's illustrations of the devil, while representing the workings of an anthropomorphic, that is, a very human-like God, the Christian God whose motives are paternalistic or fatherly. But no system of art is enough to capture Dagon. While the creature is human-like, similarity is damning rather than elevating, and it is a creature that was, as the story says, quote, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, unquote. So here we have the distinction that Poe, Doré, and the like are capable of taking the Christian God and Satan and rendering them into art properly. But here, this creature is so hideous, it's so far beyond our systems of categorization and art and naming, that it's incapable or it's impossible of putting it into art or describing it properly. So there's a contest on the level of artistic representation. And this real God, that's not even a god at all, it's just some hideous alien creature under the ocean, is incapable of being defined and circumscribed by that art. This God, this Dagon creature, is, as I said, human-like. But that human likeness becomes a twisted mirror that displays our nature and origins as a cosmic joke. It's a mockery of human ambition, pretension, and meaning. The bas-reliefs are beyond the greatest masters of the grotesque, the greatest artists of grotesque works. And the creature itself is so far removed from the rational vision of the world that mankind constructs as a defense, that the very sight of Dagon causes human beings to go mad. Through the image of chaotic primal matter, when the narrator says that looking at this hellish expanse, this mire, I was reminded of Satan's flight through chaotic primal matter in Paradise Lost. Lovecraft establishes Dagon's victory over the Hebrew or the Christian god. In Lovecraft's universe, a fragile veneer of order belies the true character of the cosmos. Man may seek to deny the fundamental facts of nature, but willful ignorance will be impossible on, quote from Dagon, that day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor riot shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium, unquote. Pandemonium, as I said in that earlier video lecture, is Milton's high capital of Satan and his peers, unquote. That high capital, in parallel, shall extend over all the earth in Dagon's rule. It's a kind of travesty of, in the Christian Bible's last book, the book of Revelation, the descent of this heavenly Jerusalem, this heavenly city that will come down from the new heaven onto the new earth, where in Revelation, this last book of the Christian Bible, there will be no more sea. So there's a direct inversion of the high capital of Satan's peer and his peers, which is universal pandemonium, rising up to cover the earth as Dagon consumes the earth in the oceans, and the opposite, had the heavenly city of the New Jerusalem in this Christian end of the world narrative, when God asserts his rule over the universe or over the earth and returns and destroys the sea. It's an inversion of this structure, the victory of Dagon versus the victory of God. Pandemonium versus the new orderly heavenly Jerusalem coming down. The sea covering over the earth versus there being no more sea. On that day, prophesied by Dagon's narrator, the risen ocean floor will restore the universe to its natural state. Primal, primordial, unformed substance. Chaos, unbound by the laws of matter or divinity. This realizes Satan's aim in triggering the fall of man. The rise of pandemonium, that universal pandemonium in Dagon, undoes the non-existent Christian God by subverting him, undermining his will, and perverting and then unmaking his creation through the rise of the chaotic swirling oceans. A second flood covers over the earth. So in Lovecraft, God is undone. The lie of universal order established by a just, purpose-giving God is exposed. Only Dagon, or rather, only the inspiration for the Philistine deity Dagon, that's beyond the human ability to understand or capture, remains. At the end of Lovecraft's tale, the narrator suffers from a kind of mental breakdown and an hallucination of Dagon appears, clawing at the door of his room. Before going silent, before attaining the death for which he longs by hurling himself from the garret window of his apartment, our narrator can only exclaim, "God, that hand, that window, the window." Well, in the first Samuel account, Dagon's final defeat occurs when he fragments, breaks apart, severing his head and his hands. Here, in the narrator's mind, it's Dagon's living, active hand that remains. The hand that shall raise monoliths and carve his image, testify to his profane existence, his power, and his inevitable rise from the ocean. While Dagon may not have a physical presence in the story, he's not actually clawing at the narrator's door. His power is still manifest. The idol beyond human aesthetics and reason is whole and intact. By the tale's end, the creature behind the Philistine myth of Dagon beats Yahweh in this new contest narrative. Just as in that day, this universal pandemonium is a kingdom that will extend over the entire material world. Now, with that understanding of Dagon and the rise of the ocean as a representation of the chaos overturning the order of the world, or at least the order that we try to impose on the world, we can better understand the nature of the mire and begin to explore its symbolic meaning. Lovecraft, in this story, fixates on the mire, this fetid plain of oozing black slime, putrid with decaying carcasses, that drags the narrator down and seeks to halt his progress. This crawl, and the act of gazing into chaos like Satan in Paradise Lost, is steeped in concepts of unformed matter. Lovecraft considers Dagon in the context of life origins when he discusses it in his letters and his literary works of literary critique. He discusses it in terms of the development from amoeba to fish to man, evolution. Scientific discourse on evolution becomes his defense against critics who attack the work due to what they appear to believe are its rather bleak aesthetic underpinnings. The tale is concerned with human origins, by implication and by contrast, in the terms of Darwinism, or Darwinian evolution. In Lovecraft's essay in defense of Dagon, while claiming that realism was not his goal, he asserts the scientific validity of the mire, citing an unidentified text by a physiographer, Alexander Agassiz, in order to claim that there is indeed, quote, a deposit of ooze consisting of the tiny shells of simple marine organisms, unquote, on the ocean floor. Lovecraft's consideration of the tale in light of scientific reality and evolutionary theory, and thus in light of his belief in both racial superiority on Darwinian grounds, in other words, that the Caucasian race is more evolved than other races, and the insignificance of man in the cosmos, creates for us a sphere of associations in which we may understand the work given its author's philosophy and racial beliefs. A critic by the name of Robert Waugh argues that Lovecraft's anti-Semitic discourse, so his discourse that assaults Jews based on their racial differences, is useful for us here, as is his suggestion that the image of slime or ooze in Lovecraft is one that the author returns to frequently as part of an anti-Semitic lexicon. One particularly relevant passage from a letter that Lovecraft wrote while he was traveling in New York reads thusly, quote, the organic things, Italico-Semitico-Mongoloid, inhabiting that awful cesspool, were monstrous and nebulous adumbrations of the pithecanthropoidal and the amoebal, vaguely molded from some stinking, viscous slime of earth's corruption, and slithering and oozing on in filthy streets in a fashion suggestion of nothing but infesting worms or deep-sea unnamabilities. The individually grotesque was lost in the collectively devastating. In this moment, he's describing the racial heterogeneity of the people that he sees in New York. He binds them all up together into the Italico-Semitico-Mongoloid. So he's taking Italians, Jews, and Asians and lumping them together into this thing, the Italico-Semitico-Mongoloid, inhabiting this cesspool, this vile pit of excrement that is the city of New York, are monstrous and nebulous. They don't have definite shape. They're adumbrations of the pithecanthropoidal and the amoebal. So they're like these unevolved amoeba or these ancient inhuman ancestors of human beings, like the ape-like ancestors of man, vaguely molded from the stinking, viscous slime of Earth's corruption, and slithering and oozing in the filthy streets. And they're similar to infesting worms or deep-sea unnamabilities. In the language that Lovecraft uses to describe these other races in his letters, we see echoes of this mire, the deep-sea unnamabilities of the mire and ooze that Lovecraft's narrator in Dagon is traveling through. In the same letter, Lovecraft also refers collectively to the appearance of the Chinese, the Central Europeans, and the Jews when he speaks of, quote, yellow leering masks with sour, sticky, acid ichors, unquote. The bigoted language here is familiar not only in its conventionality, but in its relation to Dagon. The ooze to which Lovecraft refers in his essay in defense of Dagon, and the terms by which he describes and defines the mire in this story, is part of his anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish and xenophobic and racist lexicon or language. In this story, he speaks of the grotesque, the ancient, and the unevolved, the mire and the slime, using them as poles in an associative web through his evocation of Deore's aesthetic. As to Lovecraft, the Jew is pithecanthropoidal or amoebal, that is, less evolved. The ooze takes on this primordial connotation. The movement through the mire is like a climb downwards into the earth from whence we came, filled with this ancient slime associated with our evolutionary ancestors. There, we encounter the horror of our own origins, the less evolved, the grotesquely subhuman element that Lovecraft associated particularly with the Jew. One of the principal roots of Lovecraft's horror is the gradual return to our origins that results in human degradation. So you can think about that return of the repressed or historical reversal and the fear of historical reversal. Humanity, at this very moment, according to the story, is undergoing a process of reduction rather than evolution. According to Dagon, the crawl through stillborn primordial ooze, which likewise evokes Satan's journey through unformed primal matter or chaos, explicitly connoting the Jew, and thus the subhuman or the proto-human, yokes the Christian devil to Dagon, who is himself associated with the interbreeding of races and man's less evolved forebearers. So, symbolically, in the journey that the narrator takes, we begin in the mire, a space defined by way of its connections with slime and those images to the Jew, the subhuman and the primordial. So we begin there, unformed matter, like the primal matter of Paradise Lost. It carries with it, though, only the potential for death, not the potential for evolution, because it's created from this viscous, stinking slime of corruption and death, carcasses, decaying. That leads us to the mound. There, the narrator evokes Doré and his aesthetics, Satan, and the movement through the unformed potential universe. That connects us to Dagon, forming a cycle. By way of symbolic movement, we return to the purposeless pandemonium of human origins, of the slime, the unevolved, and the mire, which contains only the promises for degradation, de-evolution, and oblivion. A confrontation with personal and collective origins is at the heart of Lovecraft's major story here, and it's represented in Dagon. So Dagon as a monster represents symbolically not only the overturning of order, sense, and logic as the chaotic forces of the universe rise up and consume what we think is order, but also that fear of the return to our origins and the fear of the less evolved races rising up, corrupting and destroying the civilized white society that Lovecraft perceives. All of this material, then, would have been articulated to you through the analysis of quotations in your small group discussions. But hopefully that gives you greater insight into the function of Dagon as a monster in Lovecraft's work.